Welcome to Guided by Third Wheel, the podcast. My name is Amber Ireland, and I'm here with my co-host, Jill Bucaro. Let's get started.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Guided by Third Wheel. Today, Amber and I decided that we wanted to talk about old stories. So in previous podcasts, we've talked, I think, a little bit or mentioned in passing, like old stories. Like, oh, that was an old story for me, or that was something I had to overcome or get over. And we thought, well, maybe not everybody knows what we're talking about with old stories, and maybe it would make sense for us to talk a little bit about what some of our old stories are that we've been able to let go of, maybe some ones we're still wrestling with, ones that we've seen in practice or seen from our friends and family, because I think a lot of us hold similar old stories.
Yeah.
Because I think there's some societal stories that are told to us and some gender-specific stories that are told to us. So we just wanted to unpack that a little bit today. So Amber, do you want to maybe start with like your favorite old story, an old story you've let go of, one you're working on?
Yeah. Well, let me give you just a little bit of what my understanding of old stories is and where it came from. And really this is a new term to me. Not a new idea, but a new term for me. Mm-hmm. And I really like it because I feel like it just validates the fact that sometimes we just get information that really is just a story. It's somebody's story that they made up or that was told to them. Much like, our ancestors had stories that they passed down from generation to generation in order to teach lessons or keep people safe and all of those types of things. And so hearing that term old stories really resonated with me to understand that information that I may have received from someone else, that may be with me on a cellular level as I came here into the world, that I got from, just society in general, is really just that. It's just a story that was passed down, and I may not need it anymore. It may have been something that kept me safe at one point in my life. And that I needed, but I don't have to keep holding it. I can just say that I don't need that story anymore. And I can, virtually close that book and be like, I'm putting this on the shelf, or I'm burning this old book,
I really hate this particular story. Well, I think too, not all stories are true. Right? Mm-hmm. Some stories are true. Some stories have elements of truth in them, but are not all the way true. And some stories are just straight up fiction, right? Are not true. So I think that's, we're told a lot of things, and we hold a lot of those stories or ideas or thoughts about the way things should be or how we should be. And I think, as we get older and quote unquote do the work, some things we're like, oh yeah, that is true, right? Like that resonates and that makes sense, and I'm glad I have this truth to carry me through. Right. And some things we're like, that's not super true all the time, right? That just doesn't always apply. And then I think, sometimes there's stories where we're like, this is absolutely not true. And maybe it served me at some point, maybe it didn't, but either way, it certainly is not serving me now.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so that's when we think about, and I think stories, we talked a little bit about this, are told to us by everybody. I think often our families of origin, our parents, or, grandparents, aunts, uncles, whatever our family culture is. I think we're told a lot of stories in school, too. I think we're told a lot of stories in churches and religious institutions. Yeah. And then now with social media and commercial and media in general, we're told a lot of stories just by society. And I think part of the work is filtering through those, right? And determining what is true for us.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think not only that, but just knowing that my story that I'm holding on to may be different than the story you're holding on to. And there may have been stories that were told to us as a collective that I didn't latch on to, that I always knew were not true. Yeah. And then there are some that, maybe you always knew were not true. And so you don't have those. And I think it's also important that as we're digging down for ourselves to release those places, to release those old stories, right? That we are sometimes doing that work with other people, because other people can shine a light in places that maybe you can't see because that's your story and it's not theirs. And we talk about this a lot in our self-care workshop too, but just sometimes when you say something out loud, you like, as soon as it comes out of your mouth, you're like, oh, that's not dumb shit.
That's not true.
But while it's rattling in your head, it just takes on a life of its own. And to have, someone to look at you when you say something out loud and be like, that's not true, right?
Yeah. And sometimes they don't even need to look at you. And that's why we know, too, like, the best therapists don't say too much at all, right? And that's why we know that individual therapy works and group therapy works. And even, like, journaling works, right? Because you're writing down those thoughts in your head. And I think, like you said, sometimes when you say something out loud, you're like, oh, God, like...
Of course
Why was I letting that control my life, right? That is so manageable. So, so I think... unpacking those stories, there's a lot of different ways we can do that.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. And I think too, just, as we, Jill and I talk about our old stories, just know that if things come up for you and you're like, God, that resonates with me. Sometimes the first time it resonates and maybe you're able to let it go won't be the last time that you see it. Because there are layers that you just keep, having to peel away. And it's not always as cut and dry as you would hope it would be. I think as humans, and we like to think that, I dealt with that. That's over. I can move on.
I know that's not true, so it has no bearing on me anymore. Right. Yeah. No, and we know that that's not the case.
No.
Most of the time. Yeah.
Pops back around when you least expect it.
back again. Yeah. Absolutely. All right, so old stories. I have a couple bouncing around in my head. Do you have any that are popping out for you?
Oh, I think, let's just go deep right from the jump. Some old stories that I have unpacked and continue to unpack are, for me, largely around worth.
Yep.
And feeling worthy, being worthy, being seen as worthy, being seen as enough. And I know that theme has a lot of stories around it.
Yes. Yep.
So, and there were stories around that came, from my childhood. And if my parents ever listen to this, which they might not, or anybody in my family, I realize that those stories came to me because those were the stories that you felt like you needed to instill in me in order to keep me safe. And so in no way, shape, or form am I saying that anyone putting those stories out there are trying to do it in like some type of malicious way, right? It's not like, ooh, let me cover this young child in this, story that I know is going to not serve them well, right? Because I want to control them, or I want to keep them, and I think just remembering that as you're unpacking old stories and where they're coming from. But yeah, there a lot of stuff from my childhood around being good enough, following Christianity in the way that my church told me things should be. Like, if you didn't do that, then you weren't good enough. And and that was like a real big one for me, because if you didn't do that, you were going to hell.
Yeah.
And that's a story that took me a long time. That piece of it went away pretty quickly when we started to realize, okay, this might not be as black and white as I think, but the way it plays out in your life in other situations can sometimes be you don't even recognize that it goes back to that.
I think yes. And I hear yes. And I'm trying to think how to articulate this. I think that you can, at least for some people I know, it's easier to let go of the okay, I don't think if I do one bad thing, I'm going to go to hell. I don't even know if I believe in hell, right? I do not subscribe to this very black and white religious view of those who are good and those who are bad.
Right.
But what is harder to let go of and harder to unpack is that compulsive and like shame based, like when I do something that my religious institution would say is not good, right? If I have casual sex, if I drink or do drugs, if I lie to somebody, right? If I do something that is perceived as selfish, if I choose myself, I can objectively and mentally say, like, I know that this does not mean that I am, like, you know, damned to hell for the rest of eternity, but there's still something inside of me that is not packed up yet, that feels shame, that feels guilt, that feels all of those things about it. And I think that's what you're talking about a little bit with the layers, is, right, you have to continually move through it, you know, to really let all of that story go. Because stories can linger, even if cognitively we know they're not true.
Right.
And how do we shed it entirely?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that religious story about, you know, like the whole purity culture of religion is there and is a story. And then the whole, like, don't do this or you'll go to hell, right?
Yeah.
Like, don't sin, like, don't be a sinner. There are good people and there are bad people, right? And there is no gray in between. I think those are stories that are really tough for people, that even if they say, I know that's not true, there is some shame deep down inside that says, I think I'm falling in the bad person category today.
Yeah. And that's something that I'm, you know, actively working on unpacking, is just recognizing that light and dark within me, you know, and knowing that they are both okay and that I need them both, right? And that makes up the whole of me, and there is no perfection. Well, there is perfection. The perfection is that I am whole and I have light and dark within me, right? But there's no sense of perfection in the sense of, like, everything about me is light. You know what I mean? That there is nothing, that there's no shadow within me, because of course there is.
Right.
Of course I'm constantly, you know, going back and forth between that light and shadow, and working to heal some of those shadow things, and also working to honor those shadows, because those shadows oftentimes have been the best learning that I've ever had, that have gotten me to different levels in my life that I wanted to be. And if I didn't have them, how would I have gotten there?
Yeah. No, and that makes me think of one of the stories that popped into my head that I think was a story that was really hard for me. And I think this is one that I feel like I've done a decent job of shedding. But it's the story, and this comes from childhood, and I think comes from family of origin, that, like, if you're not okay, like, something must be done about it. Like, if you are not happy, then you need to fucking get to work to make yourself happy. That, like, any state of being other than happiness and contentment is not okay.
Yep.
And, you know, and I think I understand, like you said, I understand the sentiment behind it, right? Like, we want to strive to be content. We want to strive to be happy. We want to put on a brave face, right? We want to be, like, you know, engaged and thoughtful and in a positive mood for the people we care about, right? All of those things are good things to aspire to. But when the story is, if you're not happy, that's not okay. For, like, you know, an angsty little depressed girl like me, like, that is a really hard pill to swallow, because what I'm telling myself is, like, there's something wrong with me because I can't get to happy. I can't get there. And, you know, and I need to hustle all day to try to get to happy, because where I'm at is just unacceptable. Like, it is unacceptable to be a human in this situation. And that was a huge one for me to let go of, to understand, like, most of my days I am happy. I really am. You know, there have been parts of my life where most of my days I am not happy, right? But I can comfortably say now that most of my days I am happy. But when I have a day where I'm not, when I have a day where I'm depressed or I'm irritable or I'm anxious, I finally have been able to let go of just, like, that utter panic that I'm not happy.
Right.
I can just be like, this is how I am today. This is not how I will be every day. But, you know, like, to your point, this is all part of me, right? And this part of me is okay. But that was a huge story for me, is, like, you must be happy to be okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a story that a lot of people get. A lot of people that do a lot of people pleasing get into that state of I need to be happy all the time. I need to look like I'm happy all the time, even if I'm not.
Yep.
And and I feel like I've been in those places before too, where you just pretend, right? You just pretend. It's like I need to pretend, because if I don't pretend, and it goes back to the story. If I don't pretend, then, people are going to look at me differently. Nobody's going to want to be around me. I'm going to be lonely. Everyone's going to leave me. And you just go down this rabbit hole of I am unlovable if I am not happy. And that story is not true. And also, if I can sit in those feelings, now I'm more emotionally intelligent and probably can have deeper relationships and more fulfilling relationships with other people, because I'm willing to say, like, today I am not happy, and I will sit with this today and look at it and know that tomorrow I get to choose what I'm going to be tomorrow.
And know that there are no humans on this planet that are happy every day.
Yeah. Oh my God. Could you imagine?
No. God, no.
We would be annoyed. People would be annoyed if everyone was happy all the time.
Nobody would like us. Yeah, but I think, and what you're talking about too, I feel like is almost an adjacent story, that like if you're not happy, you're not lovable.
Right.
If you are not like content and smiley and fucking Susie Sunshine, like ain't nobody gonna want to be with you.
Yeah.
And to your point, that leads to a lot of maladaptive behaviors, like pretending, like lying, like stuffing our feelings down, like avoiding conflict, right? Like not stating our needs, because, and that is certainly was, I think, part of a story that I carried a long time, that like nobody's gonna want me if I have needs, if I'm unhappy. You know what I mean?
Nobody's going to want you if you're a human,
Nobody's going to want me, but seriously.
Yeah.
And so I think that's another adjacent story too. But to your point, when you believe that and when you act in that way, when you pretend all the time, you're depriving yourself and your partner or your kids or your best friends of the real you.
Right.
Which means your relationship is not going to be as deep. It's not going to be as fulfilling. It's not going to be as honest. Because the story is getting in the way of that authentic connection.
Yeah.
But that's hard, man. That's a hard story for me.
It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if you think about it, you get in this space and you're like, I need to pretend, right? So you pretend the best that you can pretend, but it's pretend. So
but everybody, it's like people can feel the inauthenticity of it,
right?
Yes.
And then people leave, and they're like, I don't really trust you that much, because I know that this isn't real. Like I can feel that this isn't real. I don't want to be with you because I can't have a deeper connection with you, and that's what I want, right? And then it becomes the self-fulfilling, people leave, and you're like, well, I just wasn't good enough, so I need to be happier, and I need to
try harder, and
right?
Yeah.
And when we can sit with those feelings and really unpack, we realize like, oh, I maybe need to look at this differently. I need to look at this from a different perspective.
Yes. Like this is clearly not in the long term or really in the short term serving me. It's not getting me this story is entirely untrue, because it is proven wrong every single time.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge one for me. And that is one for me that I can cognitively say, that I can say, like, I know that I am lovable, even if I have needs, even if I'm not happy all the time, even if I don't have makeup on and my hair look nice and look good. Like, I know that I'm still lovable, and I can say that, right? And I can say that to all the people that I love around me, right? Yep. Whether professionally or personally. But you better believe that the vast majority of the time, my actions do not back up what I'm saying. Because I think that's one where it's like deep down in my shamey core, I don't know that I believe that yet.
Yeah.
Because I'm still like looking nice all the time, you know what I mean? Being pleasing and accommodating, flexing myself and my personality to fit the situation, to make sure everybody feels comfortable, right? I still am engaging in a lot of those old behaviors because I just don't know if I really believe it yet.
If you trust it.
Yeah.
You gotta try it out some more times.
Right.
Yeah. And I think, we talked about this in our energy retreat about like thoughts, words, and deeds, right? And like, if you want to get something, right? Like you want to release an old story, you want to get to a higher level of consciousness. You want to manifest something. You know, you want to buy a house, you want to buy a car, you want a new job, whatever. Your thoughts, words, and deeds have to be in alignment. Yes. And so, you know, as we're unpacking these old stories, sometimes we can get part of our words. Right.
We can say the right thing. We've read it enough times or heard somebody else say it enough times.
But, you know, when our thoughts are something different, when our actions are something different, we're still kind of in that space where we're not quite able to get over that resistance that we're feeling, which the resistance is like, oh no, something bad's going to happen if I, you know, break this old storyline.
Yes. That I'm still just a little bit entrapped in the old story.
Yeah. And I like the thoughts, words, and deeds process, because I think that it gives you a nice place, like when you're like, God, why the fuck do I feel so stuck? You know, like, I know what I want. Why am I not there? You can really look and say, okay, do I truly think that I can have this?
Yes.
Am I saying things that are in alignment with me having this? And am I doing things that are in alignment or moving me towards that?
Yeah.
And often you will find the places that, like, maybe you aren't in alignment.
Right.
And then you know what to work on, right? Like, if it's your thoughts, well, okay, how am I gonna work on this, right? Yeah. Is it gonna be some journaling? Is it gonna be some meditating? Is it gonna be some, you know, every time this comes up, I'm going to tell myself this instead? Am I gonna go to therapy? Am I gonna, you know, what am I gonna do to get that in alignment so that I can move through some of these old stories?
Yeah, no, I think that's a huge piece of it. And I think part of like identifying old stories, unpacking old stories is just like this honesty with yourself, right? Of just being able to really look and say, like, wow, Jill, like, you know, one, do your thoughts, words, and deeds align, right? And if not, where? Or like, where are you feeling this discomfort, right? Because I think sometimes, like, we cling to the old stories so hard that we won't check into what's really going on.
Yeah.
You know, and you have to be able to, like, get in there enough to say, like, this is a story and this is what I'm doing because of the story. And maybe you still say, I don't even know if this story is all the way true or all the way false, right? But let me just own the story.
Right.
You know, and really be honest with yourself about it.
Yeah.
And let it, you know, because I think sometimes stories can, like, help us understand our thoughts and our actions a little bit more. Like another one I was going to bring up is like, and I think you kind of touched on it, had to do with worth and worthiness, but very much thinking that, like, I am only worthy, I am only doing well if I am accomplishing things, right? Accomplishing things that can be outwardly recognized by other people, you know, like, am I getting promoted? What is my salary? Am I getting recognition for the work that I'm doing? Am I getting awards, right? Those types of things. I really, for a long time, tied to worthiness. And for me, like, that was a good, recognizing that story was important to me overcoming, like, my last bout of burnout, right? Because it's like, what is this, like, compulsive workaholism? Like, what is this striving? Like, what is this, like, me ignoring when I'm tired, when I'm sad, when I'm all of these things to just grind. Like, what is that about, you know? And finally, I'm like, oh, this is about the fact that I think that only if I am accomplishing things am I worthy of love and belonging and acceptance and respect from my peers. And being able to, like, say, well, I know that's not true, kind of released me from some of the compulsive actions I was engaging in, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I also had an old work story, because I, around just, like, needing to do the same thing, where it's like grind, do the things, be on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you know, and perform. And I think for me, it was an old story of, if you do that, if you're able to be accomplished in your work, then everything else in your life, like, everyone else in your life will look at you like, oh, look how well she's doing, and then you will be loved. That is your value.
So yours was a little different.
Yeah,
okay.
That is your value. Whether or not you are, working hard enough, putting in enough hours, sacrificing for work, those types of things. And I know exactly where that old story came from. Both my parents are hard workers. My step parents are hard workers. My grandparents were hard workers. And there was a lot of value put on working and what you did in your job. My dad's an entrepreneur, and he's a hairdresser, and he owns his own salon, and he still works a ton. And I do think that he truly enjoys it. However, for me, it's like I don't want to grind like that.
Right.
And so I have to let that old story go, because it's not mine. Mm-hmm. It's not mine to carry along. Yes. Like, I get to choose to do this differently and still be loved and still be valued and still have abundance.
Yes.
And also be happy in my work.
Right. And I don't have to push
right.
all the time.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that was a huge one for me, because it really just like shines a light on, why am I behaving the way that I'm behaving? And I think too, some of that honesty and looking inward with yourself is, we need to start to look at, like, what are some of the things that we are doing more compulsively? And what I mean by compulsively is, it's like when you're doing something or saying something or showing up in a way that it like feels like you have to, like from your gut, not like, oh, I've thought through critically and this is the course of action I'm going to take. This is something where it's like, I feel like if I don't do this, like, I'm going to die, right? Like, that is what I mean when I talk about like compulsive actions. And I think sometimes our unpacking some of what are we doing compulsively. Is it people pleasing that we're doing compulsively? Is it working that we're doing compulsively? Is it exercising that we're doing compulsively? Is it eating? Is it restricting eating that we're doing compulsively? Yep. Thinking, like, what are the things in your life that you are doing that you almost feel like you have no control over? That, like, if you didn't do them, the world would come screeching to a halt.
Right.
And then say, what are the stories I'm telling myself about this?
Yeah.
Because I think another story that certainly I deal with, I don't know that this story has taken over my life in a way that it has taken over other people's lives, but I think we have to talk about the story about what women should look like.
Oh, yeah.
That women should be thin, that women should be fit, but they shouldn't be too skinny, right? But they shouldn't.
And don't have too many muscles
and
either.
Don't have too many muscles, and this is what their hair should look like, and this is how they should dress, and this is how they should show up in the world. And I think that story fuels a lot of compulsive behavior around dieting and around exercise and around how we treat each other.
Yeah.
Right? For me, it feels like a lot of compulsive shopping, right? Like, I want to have like clothes that are cute or that are trendy and things like that. And so that's a huge story that I feel like many of us were told by our family of origin, that many of us are told, by media all day, every day. And also we see how people who look a certain way are treated differently in the workplace, in society, at the grocery store, right? Yeah. In a bar, in a club. Like, that's a story that we are told constantly. Yeah. And I think it's a story that runs a lot of people's lives.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one, that's an old story for me as well. The old story, same story, I don't know. But I also, and it's something that I've unpacked over the years in different layers. Like, now I'm just at a different layer of like, what does this look like for me? And, and I think too, for women also, as we age, not only do I have to be skinny enough, pretty enough, have the nicest clothes, have my hair a certain way, wear the right makeup, but my God, don't get a wrinkle. Oh. My God, don't get cellulite. My God, don't get, don't have scars on your body or anything that comes with, getting older. That's like a new place that I've kind of come into now, where I'm like, oh, like, I see people that are, around my age that are going to get like a little Botox, a little this, a little that. And, and though that's not something that, I wouldn't say that like cosmetic, and there's nothing wrong with cosmetic surgery if you want to get it and you feel good about it and you're doing it because like it makes you feel good. Like, I would hope nobody's getting cosmetic surgery because they want to please somebody else.
Right.
But it's not something I would have ever thought to do. But as I get older and I hear more about it, I'm just like, well, should I be doing that?
Like, I think that all the time. Like, man, everybody else is getting Botox, right? Like, everybody else is doing that. Like, I'm in a picture with 4 people and 3 of them get Botox, and why does my forehead look so wrinkly? You know what I mean? I mean, you do.
Yeah.
And I think that, and that's, I think, where maybe it's like, cognitively, it's like, no, I don't need Botox.
Right.
I am beautiful without Botox. But deep down inside, I'm like, I fucking want Botox. Like, I priced it out a couple weeks ago. I mean, truly, like, and it's like, why is that? Right? Like, what is that story that I'm telling myself? What iteration of the story is it? What piece of it have I not let go of? Yeah.
And I think, just a overarching human story around fear of getting older, fear of dying.
Sure.
And, that plays in for us too, because there are some cultures in the world that deal with dying better than others, right? They deal with death, deal with getting older better, and they see it as a cycle of life, and they see it as, this is what happens, and we can honor all of these cycles. But largely here in America, like, that ain't it. No. Everybody is like, we can see it even from the standpoint of bereavement leave. Somebody dies in your family, here are your 3 days, get over it and get back to work,
get moving.
Like, we don't want to talk about that.
Yes.
And so, and that's a story that society puts on us that, like, we don't talk about death, we don't talk about dying because that's ugly, and nobody wants to do that, right?
Well, and people will even say, like, I've noticed that, like, with my family or some friends, like, I'll say something about dying, right? Like, I'll say, like, well, if it's my time, it's my time, right? Or something that's kind of jokey but kind of true, and people will be like, don't say that.
Yeah.
Don't say that. Because I think there's this overarching story of fear. And I think it really, like, I think a lot about this, and I've mentioned it in another podcast, but I think, like, as humans, like, I do think most of the time we're striving for 2 things, and it's like purpose and it's connection and belonging. Connection and belonging being one. So, like, your belonging and your purpose. And I think so many of the stories we tell ourselves are trying to get one of those things, or trying to prevent ourselves from losing one of those things. Like, we want to look good. We want to look the way society thinks we should look so we can have belonging, right? So people will want to spend time with us, so people will love us, so we can, find romantic love, right? So we can, like, fit in with the cool girls, or, what I mean, or these people like that, like, and I think too, we want to have, we're doing everything in our power to be worthy so we can have purpose, right? So when we die, which we're terrified to do, we can say, like, oh, wow, I did something here, right? Like, I can check the, like, my life was worth it off the box, and I just think, when I think about that too, sometimes I think about, like, what am I scared of losing here? Am I scared of losing purpose, or am I scared of losing belonging, right?
Yeah, and when you said belonging and connection, I'm like, I also wonder if that's a story, because what that is love. And when we say things like connection and belonging, those things we don't come into the world with necessarily, right? But we do come into the world with love. Yeah. And we do come into the world with purpose. And so those things can't be taken away. They can, I guess, in connection to other people or things, but ultimately, internally, it cannot be taken away.
That's true.
And so, when we talk about connection and belonging, that is something that can be lost, right? But the love can't be lost. Like, you are always going to be lovable, and you are always going to be able to love. Like, that is not...
I think that is true. But I think as human beings, we want that connection.
Right. Absolutely.
We want it. Do we necessarily need it? I think that's debatable. But yeah, I hear what you're saying, that love is something that is purely you, that can never be taken from you. But I do think that so much of what we do is in fear of losing connection with other people.
Yeah, for sure.
Don't you think? Yeah.
For sure.
That's what that I think drives so many of our behaviors. And we have to think about that in terms of biology and evolution, and, like, the animal part of us too, right? That to be alone is to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Yes. To be alone means that you will get eaten by a lion, that you will starve to death, that you will not have access to fire and warmth and shelter and all of those things. So I think some of that fear we talk about, when we talk about attachment styles or fear of abandonment and all those things that we've kind of touched on. And now when we're talking about connection and belonging, part of that is biological to us as humans.
Yeah.
Fearing being alone. And I think, so many of the stories we tell ourselves are to prevent being alone.
Yeah. And that story of being alone, being unsafe is also a story sometimes, I think at the core level of being alone, we know that you need to have connection with other people. Like, people live longer when they have connection with other people. Babies can't live if they don't have connection. Like, we, as humans, like, we need that connection. However, I think we take that story to a lot of levels that it doesn't need to be, where it's like, I need to be partnered all the time. I need to have this number of friends all the time. If my children aren't around me from now until the end of time, like, I am going to, certainly that is going to be something that's going to kill me, right? And so that sometimes we have to let go of those old stories. And to your point from earlier around, like, I need to sit in those feelings when I feel lonely and look at that and acknowledge it and honor it and move forward. Because if you can't sit with yourself, it makes it very difficult to be in those good connections with other people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I do think there's a lot of old stories, and there's just a lot of stories in general about connection and what connection should look like.
Yes.
Let's also think about that, right? I was thinking one other old story I was thinking about is like the story that we tell ourselves about like a fulfilling life, right? And that our society tells us about. I think it's typically like kind of like this heteronormative, like family-centered story, right? That, and then, this story that like, like if you are a woman, you will partner with a man, right? And vice versa. And you will have, 2.3 children and a nice little house that you own, right? And maybe like a deranged pet or two, right? And everyone will work and all will be well. And, or maybe mom won't work. I think sometimes people are told stories that, wow, if both parents are working, like you're failing in some way, right? And so I think that's so hard for people that fall outside of that narrative, for people who are struggling with divorce, for people who have just not really found someone to partner with long term, for people who are partnered but can't have children, right? And and maybe having children is something they really want, or maybe having children is something that they really compulsively feel like they need to do to have a good and fulfilling life, right? Because that's what society or their family of origin or somebody tells them over and over again, right? For people who are in, same-sex relationships or polyamorous relationships, anybody who falls outside of that narrative, I think all have to shed that story at some point. Yeah. And that is a tough one. Yeah. Because I think there's a lot of shame that comes with that. I think that often is a story that comes up to us from multiple sources.
Oh, yeah.
And, and how do we still say, no, I'm still worthy of people loving me. I'm still worthy of belonging and things like that. I think that's a huge one that everybody struggles with.
Yeah. 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 And if you think about sometimes with your own life, like, I think when we're younger, before we, right before we're becoming adults, we like see our lives are going to be a certain way. Like we have a story about how our life is going to go. And largely that stories, I would say for most people, is based on the stories they've been told as children as to how life is supposed to go.
Yeah, how life is supposed to go.
Right. This is how it's supposed to happen. And every once in a while, you get some kids who are like, no, I'm going to go and like travel the world and do the things, right? And what do?
Right.
We look at those kids and we're like, God, they're going to be fuck ups. I just know it.
They're going to be crazy. Yeah.
Right.
Or they'll say like, I hear that a lot too, like, with my friends who are single, right? Or there's always things like, well, you haven't met the right person yet.
Right.
Or like, when people who are trying to have kids, well, when you stop trying, then you'll have them, right? Or like, maybe you're supposed to adopt, right? Or like, maybe you're just supposed to have one kid, and I think there's like, we kind of say these things that are like, oh no, like this story that you're trying to create that is beautiful, right? And you have connection and purpose it's just, the stars haven't aligned quite right for you to get back in the narrative where you need to be. Right. And people say that stuff all the time. Mm-hmm. You just haven't met the right person, or like, if he wants to travel the world, he'll settle down one day, right? He'll meet a girl that'll change his mind, know? And it's just like, even when people try to deviate from stories, often, like, the storytellers, like, yank them back, or try to at least. Yeah. And I think that's tough.
Yeah. And I mean, and like we talked about before, I think that's out of fear. It's fear. I mean, as a parent, like, there were lots of times that I think I imposed my stories on my kids out of fear. I didn't want them to get, I didn't want them to get hurt. I didn't want them to be seen in some kind of weird light by the world, know? I didn't want those things to happen to them. And so, I'm like, trying to like pull them back into the normal story, right? Yes. And like, okay, we can let's do it this way. Instead of just recognizing that, like, everybody's just got their own journey.
Everybody's got their own journey. Yes. And I think we think about, like, I think of stories as baggage, right? And sometimes we hand out baggage to other people, We're like, this suitcase is super heavy. Let me, like, take some of the stuff out of it, pack it in a backpack, and, like, sling it on my kid, Yeah. And I just think, that beginning to unpack these old stories, or even that first step, is like being aware of what are some of the stories that are fueling my life, right? What are some of the stories that are causing me stress and anxiety? When I look at where I am and where I want to be, let me be honest with myself and say how much of where I want to be is fueled by baggage or stories that are not even mine, that I don't even want,
Or how many stories sit between me and where I want to be.
Yeah, exactly.
And just really digging down into that. I think, I don't know when this is going to release, probably in December, which, perfect holiday season, story baggage time. But I think too, like, we just made it through Thanksgiving, and there were a lot of I've been unpacking a lot of old stories about needing to just people pleasing, basically, like, if you need to be with these people on the holidays, and you need to do this, you need to run around and make yourself crazy and whatnot, and I just set some boundaries, and I said, no, I'm not available for that, and also I could be available at a later date if we make plans, right? And that worked so well when I just did it.
Yeah.
And everybody, like, and I mean, mind you, I've done this with my family for quite a while now, and it was not always as easy, but it was just like, I knew that was an old story when it came up, and I was like, ooh, I don't want to do that. I like, to my core, don't want to do that. And I'm like, that is an old story that you have to. Just don't. What would you rather be doing?
Right.
And if, and for me, it wasn't even like, I would rather not see you. It was just, I don't want to see you in that setting. So, what am I going to do different?
What can I do? Well, and I think, too, I mean, and we've talked about this, I don't know if we've talked about it on the podcast or if it's something we talked about at one of the retreats, but, like, when we begin to set those boundaries, right? Or when we begin to say, like, I see you, old story, and I'm not going to engage in the compulsive behaviors, whether it's people-pleasing, whatever, associated with that story, you are, like, liberating others to do the same.
Right.
You are giving them the availability to say that as well, right? Like, when I say, like, hey, I know we talked about doing this, like, I'm not feeling well today, I just can't make it. And I'm sorry, right? And it sucks that I'm going to miss people that are out of town. It sucks that I'm going to miss quality time, but I am not up for it. I am giving every single person that was going to come to that event with me permission the next time they are sick or feeling under the weather to say, like, oh, it's okay for me to not come.
Right.
I am creating a new story in my family that says, if it is going to just totally deplete us to engage in this activity, we don't have to.
Right.
And that's a beautiful fucking story. That's a true story to have. And I think I always, like, because I think sometimes the story that comes in with a boundary is like, you're selfish, you're selfish, you're selfish, you're selfish. But I think flip that on its head. Setting boundaries, you're giving everyone else permission to take care of themselves. You're actually, it's an act of service, quite honestly, to the other people who are involved.
Yeah. And I like that you bring that up about old stories, because we have the ability to unpack old stories and to kind of put those to rest and say, like, you know, I don't want to continue to play this old story out, right?
Sure.
But then we have also an opportunity to write new stories.
Yes, writing the news stories.
And writing the news stories looks like what you said, where it's like, because I set the boundary and I'm not participating in the old story, now I'm giving other people kind of permission, or I'm modeling for them what a news story could look like for them if they chose to engage in it instead. And, you know, and I think that that's good. And I think we should create new stories. And here's the thing. That old story that you had one time was a news story that was better than that old story.
Let us not forget that. Yes.
Yeah.
Let us have like some grace and some appreciation that the old story that is no longer serving us was probably a news story that really greatly improved the quality of life for our parents, our grandparents, whoever, right? And that's what I say. I say that all the time to people. I say all the time, like, is it not our job to leave the world a better place than we found it, right? If I am doing worse than my grandparents did, right, or my great-grandparents did, then I'm not doing my job, right, for my family and my ancestors and like, we should always be leveling up as both an individual and a collective.
Yeah. And I think about it when, you know, because when I'm able to unpack things and I'm able to set, you know, kind of like my own story in motion, and then I'm always kind of reflect on it, like, oh, look at that girl, like you fucking did it, right? and I like picture like my ancestors, like my grandparents, my great grandparents being like, yes, thank you, like we didn't need that anymore, we needed somebody to turn that corner. Thank you, you know, and I'm always just like so grateful that I got to do it,
that you got to be the one to set that in motion. Let's end with this. What are some news stories that you feel like you have been able to start for yourself, for your family, for your people, professionally?
News stories. Well, news stories definitely for my family around boundaries, and that we don't have to follow the societal norms around, like, we need to be together at every holiday. We need to talk on the phone all of these times. We need to, I think sometimes the world tells you, like, you should be super close with your family and, like, see them every weekend and have dinner and all the things. And sometimes I don't think that's healthy. And so I think we've moved through that to a place where it's like, no, we can just be happy with when we do see each other, when we choose to, and know that, like, everybody made a choice to be there and everybody wants to be there, right? Instead of, having some people who are like, because that's what happens. You go to a family function and, like, 50% of the people are like, when can we get out of here?
Oh, yeah, exactly. And you're like, let's just call it. Like, let's just own this where it's at.
Yeah. And I feel like that's something that is definitely shifting for my family, that, like, we don't do that anymore as much. And I think another news story that I've been working on since back when, like, I was doing the hustle grind at work, as I was coming out of that, and I've been working on creating a news story for myself around, like, work does not have to be depleting. Work does not have to be like, I don't owe my whole life to my employer.
Sure.
And that is not my worth. And, in those pieces, like, I don't have to hustle and grind 24 hours a day in order to be worthy of a promotion, a pay raise, keeping my job, those types of things. Being seen as a good leader. I don't have to do that. And I think that's a news story that I just continually try to write for myself and for the people that I work with, in that, like, we are not going to sit here and kill ourselves for this 9 to 5. Like, we are just not going to. We are going to do the best we can. We are going to honor our clients, the people that we work with. We are going to honor one another. And at the end of the day, I am going to go home to my real life with all of the people that I love and care about, not in a depleted way. Yeah. Like, I'm not going to take them the leftovers.
Right. No, I think that's a good one. I love it.
So what are yours? What news stories have you written?
I think some of what you're talking about with the boundaries and stuff with family resonates with me too. I feel like I've, tried to like introduce some of that or model some of that. I think a big one for my family is I was like the first one in my family to go to therapy. Yeah. And I think that when I did, they're like, oh man, she's kind of crazy, right? Like, hopefully she'll go to the therapist and it'll fix her crazy. And maybe they didn't think that, right? And I'm just totally projecting my own shit onto them. But it's been cool, like, because I went to therapy. I'm still in therapy. I kind of go back and forth. It's been like several years. And it's been cool to watch, like, other people in my family go to therapy and, like, feel safe, like, saying it, right? Because I remember when I first went, I didn't tell anybody. Like, I was, I was embarrassed. I was ashamed, right? And to be able to have people, see members of my family, like, talk about, oh, my therapist said this, right? And, we can kind of bring it up when we're all together. And are there some people that maybe it makes them feel a little uncomfortable? Yes. But I feel like being able to normalize that is kind of my way of pushing back at that first story. Like, it's okay to not be okay, right? Right. So that's one that I thought of. And I think, in the work sphere, one thing that I talk about a lot and that I am proud and not ashamed to say is I feel like I do a really good job humanizing us as social workers. Yeah. I think that I think it's okay to say, like, when you go to social work school, and I understand why they do it, right? There's a lot of black and white there too. Like, there are people who have good boundaries with clients and there are people who have bad boundaries with clients, right? And people who have good boundaries leave work at home and never think about their client, when they're out freezing in the cold, right? And never take a call after 5 o'clock and never let, a client situation make them sad, right? And it's like, well, the people that we work with are humans. Right. And I'm a human. And, if an atomic bomb were to drop in the middle of Dayton today, we'd all be on a level fucking playing field, right? Here to help each other. And and my favorite quote is, something to the effect of, like, your destiny is bound up with mine, right? Yeah. And I think that I do a really good job of making it safe for people to say, like, wow, this case is keeping me up at night. Like, I talked to my client for 2 hours on the phone last night, and I know that wasn't the greatest boundary, but I'm just so worried about them, right? I just think that I do and push back on some of that bullshit. That's like, you are not a robot, and these are real life fucking humans that we're working with. Right. And we need to understand that a lot of what we do is going to operate in gray area. Yeah. And so that's a story I'm pretty proud of. And I think it's a story that makes a lot of my fellow social workers uncomfortable. But it's one that I'll continue to push because I think I know how much pain it caused me trying to live in that dichotomy of like good boundaries and bad boundaries when you're working with humans who are really, really sick and really, really vulnerable and marginalized. So, yeah.
And I think too, and this is just kind of something that came to mind when we were talking about boundaries. And, when we talk about professional boundaries and boundaries with our family and whatnot, I think that a way to tell if you are honoring a boundary or overstepping is, am I doing this in order to make myself feel better about what is happening? Because if I am doing this with another person in order to make myself feel better, then I'm crossing a boundary.
Yes.
Because that's not the purpose. Like, in a professional setting, that is not the purpose, is for me to feel better. Like, I'm talking to you for 2 hours on the phone in the evening because, I feel like maybe I didn't have enough time with you while I was at work and I just need to know you're okay. But you really don't need me, then I'm crossing a boundary with you.
Sure. Right. No, I think, and I actually teach that all the time. Yeah, if it's for the person, right? If it's for the person's good, right? Just like how sometimes with clients, and we're like getting in the weeds, but just like sometimes with clients, we don't answer the phone. Right. Because of their personality disorder because of what they have going on, because that is what's healthy for them.
Yes.
It's healthy for them, for us to hold the boundary, right? And sometimes it's the person is just in a fucking nightmare of a situation and they need human connection. They need someone to listen. They need, somebody to call the cops to come check on them in the middle of the night, right? You know what I mean? Like I think you have to think about that in a professional sense, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. All right. You want to pull a card?
Oh, yeah.
Tell us about the deck.
This is the Sacred Rebels Oracle, which Jill says we haven't pulled from this one, so that might be true.
I don't believe Jill.
This is like a really old deck, and I've pulled it 1,000 times. So,
not for I've seen it, and you've pulled for me, but not for this podcast.
Yeah, so this is an Alana Fairchild deck. If you're looking for Oracle decks, she's got some nice decks out there. A lot of different types. They're all Oracle decks, but they're like different topics, I guess. But this one's called the Sacred Rebels. So if you haven't today, or you would like to with us, let's take a deep breath and let go of some of those old stories. All right.
I do like these. They're big.
Yeah, they're big, and they're kind of like, they're not as, some cards are like super stiff. I don't really like that.
No, I don't like. Some are hard to shuffle.
And they're slippery, which makes them easier to shuffle too.
I do like a slippery.
A little slippery card. There it is.
There she is.
All right. Oh, look at that.
It says, what you want wants you.
Yes.
Interesting.
And this largely is about kind of overcoming old stories. It says, and I'll just read you a little bit here from the Oracle deck, but it says, do you dare to believe that what you want is also wanting you? The genuine desires of your heart are the sacred purpose of the soul, swathed in pleasure. Yet, if you have been shamed, judged for, or made to feel guilty over, or denied your natural desires or pleasures in any way, you may have developed a very tricky and complicated relationship with the yearnings of your heart. So I think, that largely is saying, like, if someone has given you some old stories that make you feel guilty or shame,
you need to let go of them.
Yeah.
Because I do think our old stories get in the way of helping us know what is right for us, what we really want. Don't you think?
Yes.
It's just the old stories just really cloud that clarity.
It also says, this comes with a healing message for you. First, trust in what you truly want, not the substitutions and the make-dos. What would truly bring a sense of passionate, playful purpose and fulfillment to your life. You might not know anything more than, I want to sing, I want to write, I want to help animals, I want to paint. Start with what you know and hold it in your heart and there's like a healing process below. If you don't know what your heart wants, you will very much enjoy this process of exploring your desires. Yeah, I think this is, I just feel like we just talked about all of these things.
That's good. I feel like that's been happening with the cards.
Yeah.
It's just a good reminder. Hopefully the universe is thinking we're on the right track with what we're talking about.
Here, I'll read you the very last part of this because I just talked about the healing process. And it says, you can repeat this statement 3 times with feeling. What I want wants me, and I'm open, willing, and capable to receive it through unconditional love now.
All right. What you want wants you back.
Yep.
Yes, it does.
Yep.
All right.
Trust
guys.
it.
Trust that. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Guided by Third Wheel, the podcast. We would be honored if you would like, rate, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Until next time, be well.